like to call to order the regular meeting of the BOE East Lake City Schools Board of Education here at 35353 Curtis Boulevard in East Lake. And Mr. Vassar, can you please call the roll?
Dr. Beal.
Here.
Mr. Jones.
Here.
Mr. Murhart.
Here.
Mr. Rasmus.
Here.
Mrs. Irvin.
Here.
All members present.
Thank you. If you all join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, our first item on the agenda is public comment. Mr. Bassett, has anyone filled out the form?
I don't believe so.
Okay. In that case, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is approval of the minutes of July 9th, 2020. Do I hear a motion to approve the minutes of July 9th, 2020? Yes, Mr.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Maher. Do I hear a second?
Mr. President.
Mr. Ross? Thank you very much. Any discussion? Mr. Besser, will you call the roll?
Mr. Jones.
Yes.
Mr. Murhart.
Yes.
Mr. Rasmus.
Yes.
Mrs. Irvin.
Yes.
Dr. Beal.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Next item is the approval of the minutes for July 13th. Do I hear a motion?
Mr. President,
Yes, Mrs.
I make the motion to approve item 2B, approval of the minutes of July 13th, 2020, meeting.
Thank you very much. Is there a second to that motion? Yes, Mr. Maher. Thank you. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, Mr. Besser?
Mr. Jones.
Yes.
Mr. Murhart. Yes. Mr. Rasmus.
Yes.
Mrs. Irvin.
Yes.
Dr. Beal.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. Next item, item 2C, is the approval of the minutes for July 4th. And is there a motion to approve those minutes?
Mr. President?
Yes,
I'll
sir.
make a motion to approve item number C, approval of minutes of July 14th.
Thank you, Mr. Ross. Is there a second?
Mr. President,
Mr. Jones?
I'd like to second that motion.
Thank you very much. Is there any discussion? Thank you.
Mr. Jones.
Yes.
Mr. Murhart.
Yes.
Mr. Rasmus.
Yes.
Mrs. Irvin.
Yes.
Dr. Beal.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Item 2D is the approval of minutes of July 22nd. Do I hear a motion to approve those?
It's your turn, brother.
Mr. President, I motion to approve item 2D, approval of minutes of July 27th.
Thank you very much. Is there a second?
Mr. President, I will second the motion.
Thank you, Mrs. Zinn. Is there any discussion? Thank you, Mr. Bassett.
Mr. Jones.
Yes.
Mr. Murhart.
Yes.
Mr. Rasmus.
Yes.
Mrs. Irvin.
Yes.
Dr. Beal.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
And the last item 2E, the approval of minutes of August 4th, 2020. Do I hear a motion to approve those minutes?
Mr. President.
Yes, Mr.
I'll
President.
approve the minutes.
Thank you very much. Is there a second?
Mr. President, I will
Mr.
second the
Ross.
motion.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? Mr. Bassett?
Mr. Jones.
Yes.
Mr. Murhart.
Yep.
Mr. Rasmus.
Yes.
Mrs. Irvin.
Yes.
Dr. Beal.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you very much. And next item on the agenda is the treasurer's report. For people who are here, this is Mr. Steve Bassett with our interim treasurer, and I'd like to welcome him to our meeting tonight, and we'd like to hear your report.
Thank you. Well, we just have a few routine items on the treasurer's report part of the agenda. We set up a petty cash account, approval of grants, mostly related to the CARES Act and coronavirus relief. We've got some purchase orders that need approval per board policy due to the amount, and I think 3 vending now certificates. Keep wanting to let my fingers turn these pages. We have one transfer of funds of $65,000 to the termination benefit fund to supply funds for severance packages. And item E is student activity budgets, program purposes, and goals and budgets for various student activities. And item F, sale of surplus equipment by public auction or scrap. And that is it for the treasurer's agenda.
Okay, thank you very much. And it looks like all that will be on the consent agenda.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Next up on the agenda, item 4 is the superintendent's report.
If I could, just one comment as it relates to the treasurer's report. Under grant application, some of that includes our CARES Act money, which is about $800,000, correct, Steve? And I think that's a little bit confusing to the public in general. They hear $800,000 and they think, wow, we should be in good shape, but it's important to remember the district took $1.6 million hit in state funding. We expect that much or more this fiscal year, and our total costs we're estimating somewhere between $3.5 million to $4 million in all of the preparation and throughout the whole school year, depending on how long we may or may not be in session. So in totality, we're way down. That $800,000, at least there is some talk that there may be more coming, but I'm not aware of any definitive number. Is that correct, Steve, at this point?
I'm not aware.
Okay. So I just think that's important to note.
Yeah. Thank you.
And I have a lot of pages of things. So under Q&A, there were no questions presented at our last board meeting. There are a lot of questions surfacing around, not specific at a board meeting, but surfacing around surge in parents who we had the opening for 3 weeks. Actually, we extended it by 5 days to sign up for our online learning. And many parents are now coming and saying they want to sign up for online learning. But what I don't think they understand is the logistics that it takes to pull this off. From going through our union contract, peeling out teachers, which is a complete bidding process, which takes place actually on Wednesday, to determine who those teachers would be, who they may be, assignments to the number of classes, assignment of special education teachers. It's a delicate dance, and we had a very short time window to do that as it currently stands, much less by extending it and allowing more students. But there is a significant uptick, for whatever reason, of parents who are trying to move on to our online program. So I just think that's the only question that I have at this point. The second item, Mr. President.
I see the second item is about our return and reopening guide.
Correct.
I had a question before you started that.
Okay.
I know that part of it is these codes for yellow, orange, red, purple, and what's going to happen in school. But for instance, just around the corner from us, we're in an Orange County, they're in an Orange County, they've already gone to remote learning. Is there something that we need to know or something that we should be considering that we haven't been aware of?
Yes, I think there are a lot of mitigating factors which are presenting issues for us. So for example, you'll see later in the board agenda a resolution to increase our substitute pay. We rely heavily, as all school districts do, we rely heavily on retired teachers. And a lot of those teachers are reporting that they are not going to come and sub. So last year, we would have fill rates sometimes in the neighborhood of 60 to 70%, meaning 30 to 40% of our openings were unfilled. As of last year, pre-COVID-19, substitute teachers have become quite the commodity. What we would do to handle that was internally teachers would cover from their planning periods and cover other classes. And then very commonly in elementary school, we might have 5 fifth grade classes in that building that can't fill that 5th grade teaching position, take those 25 students and spread them out to the other 4 classrooms, which obviously we can't do right now from a social distancing perspective. So that is a significant problem. Add to that, which I'll get more into detail in our plan further in the agenda, what happens if we have a COVID exposure. The COVID exposure not only impacts our students, but it impacts our teaching staff. So if you have a COVID exposure of one high school student going across 7 periods, 8 periods across the day, that can wipe out 7 to 8 teachers depending on how many classes they have, which would sideline for a 14-day quarantine 7 or 8 of our teachers depending on how many they have. I think that alone closes us. I don't think we certainly can't handle very many of those situations. And am I speaking out of turn here at all, Mr. Murphy?
Unfortunately, no.
And he's head of getting our subs, so sub shortage is Chuck Murphy's fault, just saying. Additionally, it's not just our substitute teachers. We have bus driver issues as well. We're down 3 bus drivers right now. So that's people who said, described it as, I'm not getting in a 10 box with X number of students and driving that school bus. So that's another problem. The COVID sprawl or spread is very, very difficult at this point. Our testing results, if we can even get them, are 4 to 5 days delayed. That really doesn't help us much at all, actually. So I'll go into detail in the plan about what we're going to do to respond to that, but it seems inconceivable to me that we're not going to have challenges with buildings shutting down or multiple buildings shutting down with exposure. Athletics is an extremely hot button issue, and I think most people are already aware that some of the major conferences in college football are closing. I believe we stand right now in the state of Ohio, only 1 college still remaining that is playing college football, so that is a problem. Another problem we're experiencing is we have so many cleaning supplies, our additional 360 Clorox sprayers, our thermometers, multiple health and safety items that are on back order. We are due to get them that last week heading into August. Every day we're calling our vendors and trying to do the best we can to get them. But for example, Patrick's ordered some of the Chromebooks we need for our middle school teachers, and we're expecting those to come in late July or late August, right?
Yep.
Which is past our training period, which is not super helpful from a perspective of training on that specific computer, which is a challenge. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, we have a pretty significant surge from our parent requests to go online. We did a pretty good job of estimating that. We thought we'd see about 30% of our 25 to 30% of our students go online. We hit a little over 30%. I would say we're probably easily at 40 to 45% if we opened it up right now, easily. So you have a pretty significant percentage of the population that wants to open school, and a pretty significant population that does not want to open school. So those are challenges that we face that are in addition to our reopening plan, which we've made some changes to, and that's why it appears on the agenda. So with that being said, to give you some of those ideas of what that is, we have based our opening closure initially on the coloring system from the governor's office, and unfortunately the matrix of that system changed from when we announced we were tied to that system to what it is today. So essentially the change in matrix makes it much more difficult to move from one color to the next. I'm not saying that's good or that's bad. I'm just saying simply that isn't what we understood it to be when we made that decision. So currently level 3 all school would be online, all sports would be, and extracurricular activities would be suspended. We also added that if a student is exposed, obviously, in the classroom, they can't participate in extracurricular activities. I think that's pretty much common sense, but nonetheless, we added it to our plan. Probably the most important piece that we added, aside from athletics, is being suspended in red. We added our closure policy if COVID enters a school. So our policy goes as such, which we studied other schools. There aren't many that have this out yet, but we looked at the schools that we could find that have this, and all the schools are scrambling to try to figure this piece out because, as I've said from the beginning, I think this is going to be the most difficult decision of all, even more so than where we're at today. But in our elementary schools, if one classroom and one or more students in that self-contained classroom are exposed, that class is quarantined along with that teacher for 14 days. They go remote to remote learning immediately. If we have 2 or more classrooms with exposure, that building is quarantined for 14 days. That's in elementary. In middle schools and high schools, if we have 1 case, 1 exposure, that student's class, every class they're in, is quarantined, and obviously if they're in athletics, that athletic team also becomes quarantined. That's the part I was talking about earlier that would knock out 7 to 8 teachers, causing us a lot of problems right now. But we're not officially closing the building at this point, but if we have a second case, then we quarantine the building, automatically reverts to remote learning. And then at the School of Innovation, they close if either level goes out. The whole, we're not keeping part of School of Innovation open and not part of it because it's one building, they're all in. So those are the major changes to our reopening plan at this point. And I would just really emphasize to everyone, this is very fluid, very, very fluid. And every day, something's changing. And of course, the guidance conflicts all over the place. And as it stands right now, we are full go on our athletics as it stands in extracurricular activities right now. But that seems to me to be difficult to sustain.
I think you've shown a little bit of complexity that's involved in all this, thank you. So the agenda item is 4B, reopening guide for the district. So do I hear a motion to approve the revised reopening guide for the district? Yes, Mr.
Make a motion to revise reopening guide.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. Is there a second? Mr. Ross? Thank you. Is there any discussion? You did a good job. In that case, Mr. Bassett, can you call the roll?
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Bernhardt?
Yes.
Mr. Rasmus?
Yes.
Mrs. Zerda?
Yes.
Dr. Deal?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Mr. Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. President. Item A is a resolution approving health and safety protocols during COVID-19 pandemic. And what this is, it's been vetted by our school attorney. Thank you, Mr. Murphy, for working through this policy. It does not tie us to every mandate, but we wanted to have a policy behind, for example, wearing a mask. That it wasn't just this arbitrary decision by the school district, rather it goes even, it's the governor's mandate. Initially it wasn't K-12, but obviously it becomes K-12, for example. And we were, of course, more proactive and went K-12 before he did, but nonetheless, that's what this policy signifies.
Thank you very much. You've heard the recommendation of the superintendent. Do I hear a motion to approve item 5A, resolution approving health and safety protocols during the COVID-19 pandemic?
Mr. President,
Mrs. Zerman?
I make the motion to approve item 5A, resolution approving health and safety protocols during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you, Mrs. Zerman. Do I hear a second?
Mr. President,
Mr.
I'd
Jones?
like to second that motion, please.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Is there any discussion? Thank you, Mr. Bessie.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Murhart?
Yes.
Mr. Rasmus?
Yes.
Mrs. Zerman?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Mr. Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. President. Item B for your consideration is a resolution to adopt our remote learning plan and remote instruction during the 2021 school year. I think most people are aware that in March, it was a 24-hour transition from in-class to remote learning. And I sincerely, I'm not saying this because I'm the superintendent, I sincerely believe our teachers and support staff did a great job of making that happen to the extent that they could. A lot of varying degrees of, there was one teacher, a building principal brought her college-age daughter to school the one day we had to train to specifically work with one teacher because that teacher was not really good on a computer. And so she brought her daughter in just to tutor her all day long to try and spin her up. So all efforts were made, but it was less than what we would expect moving forward. So we purchased the rights to use a school management learning, or school management system called Schoology. It's very robust. We have a clear set of expectations, timelines. We have plenty of time to teach our teachers and even our support staff how we even want our support staff to have the ability to answer the phone and be able to help someone log on or navigate their way through at least generally overall Schoology. So those plans I think will make our remote learning much more robust for our 2,400 students who have signed up for it today, 2,400 out of about 8,300 students or so. And the entire district will be trained. So even our teachers that are teaching in the classroom will be able to flip very quickly to remote learning if we have to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. You've heard the recommendation of the superintendent. Do I hear a motion to adopt item 5B, resolution adopting a remote learning plan to provide remote instruction during the 2020-2021 school year?
Mr. President,
Mr.
I'd
Ross?
like to make a motion to approve item 5B, resolution adopting a remote learning plan to provide remote instruction during the 2020-21 school year.
Thank you, Mr. Rasmus. Do I hear a second?
Mr. President,
Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
I second that motion.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, Mr. Bessie?
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Murhart?
Yes.
Mr. Rasmus?
Yes.
Mrs. Zerman?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Mr. Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. President. Item C is a resolution approving and authorizing a reduction of the number of school hours. It's very common across the country. You've seen this. Ours was a 2-week delay in the start of school, and then we have the early release. So you understand how that early release is working on Wednesdays. Middle school will end at 1:10, high school at 12:20. There'll be activities for students in a rotating basis, socially distanced, the best that we can. In our building, for those who don't have a ride home or can't leave, don't drive, and which will reinforce the curriculum. And then they'll ride their regular bus route home at the end of the day. You might say, well, why didn't you move the bus routes up? Because we have a lot of midday bus routes, and we don't have the bus drivers or buses that could do both our midday routes and bus all our middle school and high school kids home. But they'll have the option of staying there so parents aren't put out from that. But what that allows us to do is, and this is only 6 through 12. Elementary is not dismissing early, just 6 through 12. And the reason is our high school teachers, middle school and high school teachers, remember, are streaming live. So they have their in-class assignment and instruction, and then they have to upload everything, record themselves, and contact and reach out to online students. So in order to do that effectively, they needed more time, and so that was the resolution that we brokered with the teachers union as a resolution to having them do both online and in-class instruction. And I have to say, all the unions have been, I think, spectacular in terms of really all of us working together to, I think, with the best interest of students at heart the whole time. So it's gone, I think it's smooth. None of them's here, but I think it's gone as smoothly as one could expect, or maybe even better, actually.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. So do I hear a motion to approve item 5C, resolution approving and authorizing a reduction in the number of hours that the district will be open for instruction during the 2020-2021 school year compared to the 2019-2020 school year for the purpose of adopting the school district calendar?
Make a motion, I'm not reading that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mara. Do I hear a second?
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr.
I second that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Is there any discussion? Steve, you said that those activities would be supervised.
Yes. They'll be supervised not by teachers, but by support staff. Some of our aides, some of our monitors will be doing that. So there's some opportunity for some of them to get some additional hours, but some of them not to lose hours as well. So it's kind of a mix. And I do want to note that depending on how many snow days we have, hopefully 0, but it could impact the schedule at the end of the year, and if it does, we'll let you know. Mr. Murphy's doing those calculations, and we'll see, because remember, it's not by days anymore, it's by hours. That's how it's calculated. The school year's calculated by hours, not days. And if we're short hours for whatever reason, we'll have to adjust.
Any other discussion?
Steve, is that broken up by grade?
Hours, yeah, by K-5 and 6-12.
That's short.
Yeah, yes. The shorter day on Wednesday is just 6-12.
And so are they broken up, like each grade, or how are they broken up?
You mean in terms of the activities that they'll do? They'll be broken up by grade. Well, we don't expect, my experience is if high school kids can leave at 12:20, they will find a way to leave. I mean, I don't expect very many of them to stay, and some of them will. Some of them might stay because they have athletic practices after school, if that's still happening. So that could cause some to stay, but if there's a way to leave, they'll find, most of them will find it, but there will be activities if they don't. The grade that will probably most likely stay would be our 6th graders. We expect, maybe 100 or so, and then we'll keep them by grade level, rotating from the gym, the cafeteria, the media center, the computer labs, and keeping them engaged and moving.
Any other discussion? Yeah, Mr. Massey?
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Murhart?
Yes.
Mr. Roskus?
Yes.
Mrs. Zerman?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Mr. Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. President. Item E for your consideration is alert lease termination agreement with the city of Willoughby Hills. Did I skip one?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Okay, oh yes. This is a resolution, item D is a resolution of intent not to provide career technical education in grades 7 and 8. That was something that was passed, Chuck, how long ago? 5 years ago? Somewhere around in there. I don't know of any school that provides career technical education for 7th and 8th graders, but the law states that we have to, if we don't provide it, then we have to pass a resolution. So that's what this is.
Thank you. Do I hear a motion to adopt Resolution 5D, resolution of intent not to provide career technical education in grades 7 and 8?
Mr. President,
Mr. Russ?
I will make a motion to approve item 5D, resolution of intent not to provide career technical education in grades 7 and 8.
Thank you, Mr. Vasquez. Do I hear a second?
Mr. President,
Mrs. Ritter?
I will second the motion.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? Mr. Vasquez?
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Murhart?
Yes.
Mr. Roskus?
Yes.
Mrs. Zerman?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Item E for your consideration is the lease termination agreement with the city of Willoughby Hills. That is the property that used to house one of our elementary schools. I think it was Garfield, I believe, many moons ago. And it was used leased to Willoughby Hills for $1 a year, which was used for soccer fields. They have other areas that they've moved their soccer to. And as we said in our levy campaign, if we failed that levy in November, we would liquidate property. This is one of the properties that we're liquidating. There is definite interest in this property. I think one exciting one that I don't feel compelled to announce publicly, but nonetheless, there is interest in that property. So, but in order to do that, we had a long-term lease with the city, and this is required to get up to have that lease terminated.
Thank you. Do I hear a motion to adopt item 5E, lease termination agreement with the city of Willoughby Hills?
Mr. President?
Yes, please.
I make the motion to approve item 5E, lease termination agreement with the city of Willoughby Hills.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Do I hear a second? Mr. Murphy?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Is there any discussion?
So this lease is terminated on the day of the sale, correct, or the auction?
Correct.
Any other discussion? Mr. Bassett?
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Murhart?
Yes.
Mr. Rasmus?
Yes.
Mrs. Zerl?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you.
And just so you know that as a school district, we cannot directly sell to a private individual. We could another city or subdivision, governmental subdivision. That is the only entity that we could directly negotiate with and sell to outside of an auction process. Best highest bidder. All right. Item F for your consideration.
Gotta call the roll.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
No, we did. We did. Yeah, we did.
Item F for your consideration is professional development stipends. Those are what we do every year for those that are doing professional development outside the context of the day.
do I hear a motion to approve item 5F, professional development stipends recommendation?
Mr. President?
Yes, Mr.
I motion to approve item 5F, professional development stipends recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Do I hear a second?
Mr. President, I'll second that motion.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? Mr. Bassett?
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Murhart?
Yes.
Mr. Rasmus?
Yes.
Mrs. Zerl?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson?
Item G for your consideration is a salary class revision. So essentially what happened was an individual had submitted the proper documentation to move on the salary schedule, but somehow it just didn't get documented correctly. The person didn't notice the difference, and correct me if I'm saying any of this out of turn, Mr. Murphy, didn't realize they weren't getting that they hadn't moved to the next index, i.e. losing money. So this is like a significant Christmas present for this person. So I don't know what triggered them to figure it out, but eventually they figured it out, and they can be reimbursed back to 5 years. Is that correct, Mr. Murphy?
Yes.
So they won't get the full amount, but they'll get 5 years of that reimbursement, which is in the neighborhood of about $30,000. So it is, but that's not across the board. That's just one individual. Okay, that's what it is. Not across the board.
And so wait, you mentioned that you can only go back 5 years, but how long was it happening?
It was happening before, I'm glad to say it happened
Thank you.
before me or Mr. Murphy, we even were employed here. So it goes pretty far back.
Do I hear a motion to approve item 5G, salary class revision? Ms. Murhart?
Make a motion to approve item 5G.
Thank you very much, Ms. Murhart. Do I hear a second?
Mr. President?
Yes, Mr.
I second that motion.
Thank you. Do I hear any further discussion? Hearing none, Mr. Bassett?
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Murhart?
Yes.
Mr. Rasmus?
Yes.
Mrs. Zerl?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Mr. Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. President. Item H for your consideration is the adult nursing wage index, which you are required to approve each year.
Thank you. I've heard the superintendent's recommendation. Do I hear a motion to approve item 5H, adult nursing wage index?
Mr. President, I will make a motion to approve item 5H, adult nursing wage index.
Thank you, Mr. Rossi. Do I hear a second?
Mr. President, I will second the motion.
Thank you, Mrs. Lewis. Is there any discussion? So this is, we do this just every year?
Yes.
Mr. S?
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Bernhardt?
Yes.
Mr. Roskis?
Yes.
Mrs. Zerda?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. President. Item I for your consideration is what I had mentioned previously when talking about how difficult it is going to be to acquire subs. This is a certified substitute pay schedule. We did some research and found out that we were paying $90, while most of the districts around us were paying $125, which is certainly contributing to the reason we were struggling to get substitute teachers. If you take $90 an hour over an 8-hour day, that's about a little over $10 an hour for someone with a college degree, and that just wasn't working for us to pull those folks in. So we're at 125. We're recommending 125 per day for a substitute teacher, $150 per day in our ED classrooms only. Those are the most difficult subs to find. And then we are also paying Mr. Murphy $150 for our long-term sub.
Building subs.
Building sub. I'm sorry, not a long-term sub, but which is the whole year, but our
Right.
building sub, who will also be on a contract and receive sick days and personal leave.
Thank you. Do I hear a motion to approve item 5I, certified substitute pay schedule?
Mr. President,
Mr. Jones?
I motion to approve item 5I, certified substitute pay schedule.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Do I hear a second? Mr. Bernhardt, thank you. Is there any discussion?
Yeah, Steve, I have a question.
Hmm?
Okay, so we're talking long-term substitute pay, continuing, or like starting after the 31st day of service?
Yeah.
And then building substitute pay at $150 per day from the start. Does that mean that they transition to 227?
A building substitute does not ever transition to that first year pay. That $227.25 is the daily rate for a first year teacher at step 0.
Got it?
So a long-term sub, you're out ill, I'm subbing for you. After I hit 30 days, I go from $125 a day to $227 per day until the duration of that assignment ends.
Does that happen frequently? We have one.
How frequently does that happen, Mr. Murphy?
Well, maternity leaves mostly, and then some medical leaves. So not often, but it certainly happens.
Every year, there's somebody, right?
Oh, I mean, at least one per building every year, if not a couple.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion? Mr. Bessie?
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Bernhardt?
Yes.
Mr. Roskis?
Yes.
Mrs. Zerda?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Mr. Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. President. Item J is our classified substitute pay schedule, which is attached.
Thank you. Do I hear a motion to approve item 5J, classified substitute pay schedule?
Mr. President,
Mrs. Zern?
I make the motion to approve the classified substitute pay schedule.
Thank you, Mrs. Zern. Do I hear a second?
Mr. President,
Mr.
I'll
Ross?
second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Ross. Is there any discussion?
Are there any real changes to the classified substitute? I just know.
No.
Mr. Bessie?
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Bernhardt?
Yes.
Mr. Roskis?
Yes.
Mrs. Zerda?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Item K is a memorandum of agreement between WIDA, which is our teachers association in the district. One thing, I'm gonna turn it over to Mr. Murphy to explain this in just a minute, but I do want to note that in this agreement, we have initially offered members who have an Americans with Disabilities Act accommodation due to COVID-19. They were given the first opportunity to teach our online classes, which I think was a great agreement on both sides of that discussion. But Mr. Murphy, you want to explain this briefly?
Sure. Felt like we needed an MOU to help guide us on how to staff an online school because, quite frankly, we've never staffed an online school. So typically, when we staff anything, seniority will rule the day in terms of making determinations on staffing decisions. And that is certainly going to be the case here. We had two exceptions, though, that we wanted to note through this MOU. Mr. Thompson mentioned the first one about placing staff members with ADA accommodation needs first, and we did that. And then the second exception to our bargaining agreement that's covered in this is the fact that normally when teachers get displaced, they have what's called rights of first refusal back to the building. We decided that it was important that anybody who teaches in the online school, whether they were displaced or they volunteer, because they could be volunteering not necessarily because they want to, but because of some issues with family members that they felt safer that way, but maybe didn't have the doctor's excuse, that everybody would retain rights of first refusal back to the building they came from. And so we felt that was important to our staff members to give them that peace of mind because typically they like being where they're at and they would want to return when this is all done. So that's really what's covered in this MOU.
So is there a motion to approve item 5K, memorandum of agreement between the Louisiana State Teachers Association and the district? Thank you, Mr. Carter. Is there a second? Mr. Hopkins? Thank you, Mr. Hopkins. Is there any other discussion?
Mr. Jones? Yes. Mr. Murhart?
Yes.
Mr. Ross? Yes. Mrs. Zerl?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you, Mr. President. Item L for your consideration is the 2020-2021 fee schedule with only minor adjustments.
Is there a motion to approve item 5L, 2020-2021?
This is consent.
Oh, okay, thank you. Didn't notice that. Thank you very much, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is consent as well. The School of Practical Nursing Student Handbook, Adult Division, and that is for the 2021 school year. Item N for your consideration is a special service agreements. These are all the agreements that you approve every year. Most of them are for therapy, transportation, special education would capsulize what you are approving in item N. Item O for your consideration is the Student Code of Conduct and related policies. Again, no significant changes with the exception of our mask policies. Item P for your consideration, and I guess I should pause here, and this is not a consent agenda item, is the employment of, in contract for, in salary schedule for our new treasurer. He is in the back and patiently waiting. Nick Charnello is, we welcome you. Nick brings an interesting background in that he not only was a previous treasurer in his current district, but he was also an auditor for the state previous to that. So he brings those two pieces of experience, which I think are very beneficial to us. So we welcome you, Nick. The board welcomes you. That's if they approve you. I don't know how they're going to vote, so you have to wait. But as long as they vote you in 3-2, you've got a contract and you're in.
Do I hear a motion to approve item 5P, treasurer's employment contract with salaries?
Mr. President?
Yes.
I make the motion to approve item 5P, treasurer's employment contract and salary schedule.
Thank you, Mrs. Green. Do we hear a second? Mr. Burns? Thank you very much. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, Mr. President?
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Murhart?
Yes.
Mr. Roskis?
Yes.
Mrs. Zerl?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Welcome, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. President. Item Q for your approval is the personnel agenda. As always, these folks are subject to the Ohio Department of Education, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and satisfactory reports in the Bureau of Criminal Identification and Investigation prior to them becoming full-time employees. And that list is available before board meetings.
Do I hear a motion to approve item 5Q, personnel? Yes, Mr. Moore. Thank you, Mr. Moore. Do I hear a second?
Mr. President, I will second.
Thank you, Mr. August. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, Mr. President.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Bernhardt?
Yes.
Mr. Rasmus?
Yes.
Mrs. Zerman?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you, Mr. President. Item A for your consideration is the first reading of the following. That's a lot of policies right there. Mr. Murphy, I don't know how you stayed awake during that whole time filtering through all of these, but thank you for doing so. Item 17 is our protective facial covering pandemic epidemic events. That's the name of a policy. And you're going to see a lot of red because there was initial guidance and then new guidance came out. And so the new guidance is much shorter than the previous guidance, but it's all been vetted. And this was from our rep, correct?
Correct.
So we feel good about that policy matching our intent, but that's a lot of policies for first reading. Enjoy your evening of reading district policies. No. Not yet. Next one.
So the next item on the agenda is meeting notification for next month. The next regular Board of Education meeting is scheduled for September 14th, 2020 at 7 p.m. It says on the first floor, but if it's in person, I'm assuming it will be here on the third floor of the BOE Board of Education.
The only reason we moved up here isn't for social distancing per se. We moved up here because, is it okay if I tell them the truth, Patrick?
Yep.
Patrick came and cried. That was going to make him take down all his electronic devices that makes it all go on the internet. And no, in all seriousness, it would have taken him several hours to dismantle that, several hours to put it back in place. And at this point, my belief is that we'll need that to be in place at some point. And so and maybe things will change and we'll change our mind and we'll set that room back up. But that's why we moved to here. So I guess next month would be wait and see.
Item 8 is the consent calendar. So do I hear a motion to approve the consent calendar?
Mr. President?
Yes, ma'am.
Make the motion to approve item 8A, adoption of consent calendar.
Thank you, Mrs. Murphy. Do I hear a second?
Mr. President, I'd like to second.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, Mr. President.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Bernhardt?
Yes.
Mr. Rasmus?
Yes.
Mrs. Zerman?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
And the final item on the agenda